knocking him down, because it's so easy to knock him down after you portray him that way, or her that way, right? So anyway, but he basically, he says, look, we have to use natural resources to survive, and if environmentalism were to acknowledge this, then their ideology would lose its meaning. The earth and its life are tough and resilient. We all live upstream, right? Compared to the environmentalists, the little ninny guy who's so concerned about everything. We all live downstream. You can't do anything up there. It's going to hurt me too, right? Anyway, he says, hey, man, we all live upstream, and we're supposed to be using these resources. Competence to make a living from the natural world, curiosity, optimism, these things are all encouraged by a wise use attitude toward natural resources, right? Improving the earth for the massive use of future generations. Okay, and then here is where his teleological language is most evident, right? But he throws in these little weasel words, right? Or not, because he's frightened, he's scared. I mean, he's nervous about frightening some people away. And he knows that if he just came out and said, that's what I believe, man, we're the flower of creation, but that is what he believes. Humanity may ultimately prove to be a force of nature forwarding some cosmic teleology of which we are not yet aware. We're not. Humanity may be the universe awakening and becoming conscious of itself, or not. Our reworking of the earth may be of the utmost evolutionary benevolence and importance. All right, and now you know, when you encounter language like wherever, famous speech by Martin Luther King, it's replete with natural law kind of arguments. Talking about destiny, the moral arc of the universe. I usually use that. The moral arc of history, or the moral arc of the universe, is long, but it bends toward justice, right? Ta-da! And many of us believe that, just routinely. We look at our history and we see we had all these moral struggles that were resolved in favor of recognizing more people as having moral status, and that's progress, right? So that does seem to suggest that, right, in the 5,000 years or whatever of written history, right, we seem to be making moral progress. As more and more people get the right to vote, more and more people are included in the economy, more and more people are not excluded on the basis of their race or their ethnicity or their religion or their sexuality or their gender or their orient, right? And that all may be, and so that's what Martin Luther King is referring to when he makes that statement in the mid-1950s or 1960s in his famous letter from Birmingham jail. I think, I'm not sure where that's from. Anyway, a lot of his writings have this kind of language in them. And now you can, hey, wow, I learned that in my philosophy class, right? This is a natural design argument, and now you know also it's really a pre-Enlightenment argument, and it kind of relies on this teleological interpretation of history, which may be metaphysically suspect, right? And we want to be real questionable about that. We want to be suspicious about any kind of metaphysical commitment, like saying, history is teleological. That's kind of a big commitment, right? As philosophers, we're real skeptical of things like that. All right. So he accuses environmentalism of promoting feelings of guilt just for being alive, right? Which naturally degenerates into pessimism, self-loathing, and depression. Yeah, I just loathe myself. Wise use by its very nature promotes feelings of competence to live in the world. Hooray, right? Optimism toward improving the earth for the massive use of future generations. The glory of the dominant Western worldview is the metaphor of progress. No, I can't finish reading it because environmentalists call humanity a cancer on the earth. Wise users call us a joy. All right. So this is the eco-ideology that Ron Arnold accuses environmentalists of clinging to, and that Ron Arnold is proud to have rejected. And some of it's really kind of cool, actually. For example, he thinks he's rejecting, as I do when I de-emphasize environmental ethics and I wish to speak more of natural resource ethics. I wish to speak more of earth ethics, because talking about environmental ethics separates us too much. It reinforces this dichotomy between human and non-human. So he's got some insights here. Nature is a world without humans, right? According to Wright, and that there is something to that when he accuses mainstream 20th century, mid-20th century, especially conservationists, resource protectionist conservationists, of upholding these dichotomies. Because they did talk, and they still to this day talk about wilderness preservationists. That's like the holy grail of everything we ought to be seeking and doing, right, is preserving wilderness. Just setting it aside, right? And I, myself, kind of agree with Ron Arnold's sentiment. A lot of 21st century people who care about the earth also think, well, we need to get away from wilderness preservation as the be-all and end-all of the environmental movement. We have to start worrying about the nature and the ecosystems that are right here. And that's kind of one implication of what Ron Arnold is saying. So I give him a thumbs up on that. Stark dichotomy, right? These are all kind of misguided. These are parts of the misguided metaphysics, really. And he's kind of pointing that out, which, okay, you got to give him praise where he deserves it. Earthly goods are limited. He says that's not true, though. He says these environmentalists believe that humankind is prone to exceed the Earth's carrying capacity because human wants exceed human needs. The environmentalists tend to believe that Earth and its wildlife and its ecosystems are fragile, right? Environmentalists tend to believe that nature's way is best. But all of these things are just wrong, Arnold says. Environmentalism is radical, he says, in the sense of demanding fundamental. And this is really what he's concerned about, okay? This is what all right-wingers, all corporatists, and their lapdogs in Congress and in the White House, this is really what they care about. They care about the fact that scientists are telling us that if we continue treating natural resources, earth, land, air, water, wildlife, the way we are, then we're toast. And the only way to stop treating them that way is to form, is through major interventions in the global marketplace, right? Which is their bugaboo, right? They don't want to hear anything about that. Socialism, they say, right? And this, I would submit, yeah, I mean, under most definitions of environmentalism, we need to have one world governance structures to stop predators from despoiling the earth, okay? Right? So yeah, not necessarily one world big brother government, but a lot more cooperation and a lot more intervention on the part of the people through our government in the marketplace to stop these crazy schemes like the Tesoro Savage Oil Terminal in the Port of Vancouver. If they get away with that, it's lights out, man, for everything that we love in the Northwest. And yet they're pushing it through. And yet they know if we got together, we would call for socialism, just like these socialist dams we did call for 60 years ago. They're all socialist dams. They were built by us, by we the people, through our government intervening in the market, right? If the free marketeers in those days had had their way, they would have just built the dams themselves, and our electricity bills would be about 20 times higher than they are now, right? Anyway, so we got all kinds of socialism. In fact, socialism made America great. It really did, if you think about it. Every institution and policy that does something, that accomplish, like social security, right, and healthcare, all those things that do things for the people are basically socialist initiatives. So anyway, that's all environmentalists. That's from a real big picture point of view. That's the big point that environmentalists keep making, is that in order to achieve a harmonious relationship between humankind and the natural world, we need to have a strong government that regularly intervenes in what people would otherwise do, right? Some economists talk about the tragedy of the commons, right? And the argument that many environmentalists make is that the only way to avoid situations where people overuse the natural world and destroy resources is to have strong regulations, right? Anyway, but regulations are the bugaboo and the anathema to the wise use perspective, right? That's what they want to get away from. And so he's got to backtrack and construct this whole argument about why environmentalism is wrong, because he does not want the environmentalist basic point to percolate up into the consciousness of the American people to the point where finally the American people realize that if they want to save their natural resources, then they need to intervene in the marketplace, right? And just put a stop to all this fracking and these crazy oil trains. 4 oil trains a day with 80 cars on each train. Are you kidding me? Going down the Columbia Gorge and then dumping all their disgusting product into these giant oil tankers and then taking them down the Columbia River, our beautiful river, taking them down the Columbia River and then sending them over to China because Congress just lifted the ban on crude oil exports, right? Our team is being defeated quite resoundingly. I shouldn't say our, because who knows? Maybe it's just my team and all by myself and all of you are on the other team. I don't know. Probably not, though. I find over the years that most students who take this class care probably as much as I do about these issues. Anyway, all right. So that's what's really going on. All right, and this, I don't do this treatment to William Baxter, who was the other reading that I asked you to do today, which is the other reading. Because William Baxter, actually, his work was peer-reviewed. I think he passed away a number of years ago, but he was active in, at Stanford University. I think he was a law professor, actually. But he wrote this famous essay that I asked you to read, and it's pretty much in every single anthology of environmental ethics. A lot of professors ask their students to buy, and there are many good ones out there. I used a few over the years. I used many of them. I kind of went through them, and then I realized, well, I know and it's all available on the internet, so now I don't ask people to buy books anymore. But every single one of the anthologies that I used to teach this class in the past contained this the essay that we'll get to in a moment by William Baxter. And that's a real philosophical argument. Actually, it's an Enlightenment argument. Very Kantian / utilitarian, both really are in there. And it's a legitimate argument, you know, it's peer-reviewed, and like I said, it appears in all the anthologies, so it's pretty important. This one I asked you to read. Hardly anyone ever even pays any attention to Ron Arnold in academia. Most people don't even know who he is. But I wanted to read Ron Arnold just to give you an idea of an argument that still carries a lot, accomplishes a lot, gets a lot of work done in our culture, even though philosophically it doesn't hold together at all. All right, but anyway, some more implications of the wise use perspective. This is why I played that Beethoven's Sixth Pastoral Symphony, because this is what Ron Arnold portrays. He insists, you know, that everything we need, and he's right about this. And he says, but he goes on to say, the real environmentalists live and work in the middle landscape, and they are good stewards. They depend for their livelihood on the land, and actually he's right, and that's true. That actually is very true. From what I know about people who live in what he calls the middle landscape, they are good stewards of their land because they know that they depend on for their livelihood on the land. Every day is Earth Day, he says, for folks who live and work in the middle landscape. If only the radical eco-ideologues would leave them alone, then these folks would be able to continue stewarding their lands, waterways, and wildlife. And this is the turn in his argument where I just, you know, because I mean, to me, it's not the radical eco-ideologues that are causing problems to rural folks. It's global corporate predation on the middle landscape, right? Where, what happened to the timber industry in the Northwest? Was it destroyed by eco-ideologues? Of course not. It disappeared because laws changed and we stopped processing our raw logs. And our raw logs just started getting sent over to another country because it's a lot cheaper to process logs in other countries, right? And so all these mills shut down, and all these people in the middle landscape suffered. Their families suffered. They lost their livelihoods, right? They lost their pride, their dignity. But it wasn't the spotted owl and the environmentalists who did that. If you look at it honestly, it was policies originating in Washington, D.C. Just trade, economic and trade and labor policies, and that's it. And if anything, a lot of these eco-ideologues are on the side. And they're suggesting that we restructure our economic system in order to allow for the dignity of work in the landscape, work in the land, right? So that resources aren't just extracted to go serve some corporation overseas, but are extracted on behalf to serve the people, right? The people who live there. And I think that seems to me what a lot of environmentalists are talking about. In any event, so he's a little misguided there. Government should encourage resource extraction, he says, by easing, and this is his little Trojan horse, seemingly libertarian argument to basically just strip away all these protections that really are supposed to be protections for we the people, right? Our water, our clean air, our wildlife, our wolves, our streams, our salmon runs, right? That's why we have these regulations. And, you know, so to suggest that they be eliminated seems a bit odd. Allowing but it's what the corporations want. You know, the factory farmers, the factory ranchers, the giant logging companies, the giant mining companies, the drillers, the frackers, etc. His goal is to just expand their liberty to extract resources from Earth with no interference from government, because that's what's good for business and good for society as a whole. A strong economy will lead to a healthy environment. Large corporations are you've heard all this, right? All these zombie ideas. Government restrictions on industry and trade must be eliminated, etc., etc., etc. The benefits will trickle down and benefit the average American family. basically any kind of resource extraction and consumption is good for society, so let the frackers have at it and go shopping yourself and drive your big SUV 10 miles to the mall or just a block. All right, should our home planet be improved for the massive use of future generations? A disquieting question. All right, does anyone have any questions about natural law theory or about our new friend, Uncle Ron? Family member, yes?
You said that there wasn't like any giveaways, like doesn't identify as religious beliefs like outright very often, but the term articles of faith is a pretty common, like saying Great Awakening, a lot of different religious, like 19th century religions had that term as like putting forth their ideas on it for everyone understands.
Mm-hmm. And he wants to argue that eco-ideology is just another religious faith. They need these articles of faith, and it's ideology to suggest that, for example, continuing to emit large quantities of CO2 and methane into the atmosphere, as scientists have instructed us, causes planetary climate destabilization. That's to him that right everything that ecologists and biologists have been telling us about the effects of our industrial activities on the future habitability of the planet, all that is just an article of faith, right? Belief, right? Belief in anthropogenic climate destabilization is an article of faith. Belief in evolution is an article of faith. I mean, this guy, right, and I don't do this to anybody else. You might think I'm being unfair, right, because he's not here to defend himself. But if he was a regular academic who made his work available for peer review, then I would never treat him like this. But I'm sorry, man. I mean, if you go do some research on this guy, you'll find out that he's the guy who's championing these huge articles of faith, right? He's this Abrahamic fundamentalist guy who thinks that the earth is there for all of us to just use up, right? And he goes, anyway. So does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. All right, anybody else?
Is there any argument that is like that makes the same claim that we live upstream, but takes responsibility for that more, and like all the other the holistic approach downstream?
Sure, absolutely, yeah. Unless, as I said, every author we read this term acknowledges that humans are unique on Earth, unique animals, and have extraordinary powers and have moral status that exceeds that of all other animals. But most of the authors, of course, want to say that we've gone way too far in that direction, that other animals have moral status, and ecosystems, ecological wholes have moral status too. But when push comes to shove, these authors everyone we read is going to acknowledge. If you're on a lifeboat that only holds 420-pound animals, and there happen to be 420-pound human beings and 120-pound German Shepherd, every single one of these authors we read is going to admit that, yep, we're going to chuck the German Shepherd overboard. That's just how it goes. So anyway, I'm sorry, I might not have answered your question. Did I?
I was just wondering what would that argument be called? Like one that has
okay.
a more holistic approach, but still takes that.
Bergoglio, I think, Pope Francis takes a strongly. Of course, his argument has a strongly theocentric flavor to it. Part of his argument is that every species, he argues very passionately and strongly for preservation of biodiversity. If a species is endangered, we need to stop it from going extinct. We need to encourage. Anyway, but he does that because every species is made by God, right? So every species has intrinsic value just in virtue of the fact that God made it. So there's a strongly environmentalist message coming from a strongly theocentric and from the heart of Abrahamic religion, the Catholic Church, for heaven's sakes. No, not the heart, the three hearts, right? There's Islam, there's Judaism, and then there's Christianity. And of course, the Pope's only in charge of part of Christianity, not the whole thing. So anyway, he's not my Pope, but he's a good guy. I like him a lot. He has a nice smile. He really does. He's cool. I think, who knows? He might have some, mental hang-up still, but we all do. And he's just putting together these beautiful arguments. He's really a social ecologist, the Pope. He's talking about how the environmental crisis is simultaneously a social crisis. And not only do we need to act immediately and urgently on behalf of ecosystems, but also on behalf of impoverished and marginalized and excluded people. So he says we got to solve both problems at the same time. And he's right, probably right about that. Many other thinkers, non-religious thinkers, are saying the same thing. That's sort of a social ecology perspective. We'll get to that near the end of the term, the social ecology tradition. You had a question here too?
No, I was just more thinking about the last guy that you had there that was peer reviewed. He had something near the bottom that said the benefits will trickle down from allowing corporations to exploit resources without interference from the government. And coming from a guy that's like peer reviewed about that, or
he's not peer reviewed.
This is the guy.
Oh, this is the guy that's not peer reviewed.
He's the only well.
Oh, I see. According to Ron. Oh yeah. I was gonna say, because it's just like that. That would seem like we have tons of empirical evidence against that, since any large corporations that are operating in countries that are, say, less inhibited by governments.
Yes, exactly.
There is definitely less trickle down, and in the more first world countries that we actually have a lot of government interference and laws regarding this, we actually do have a higher quality of life.
Yeah. A note of caution perhaps could be learned from reading this essay and then finding out what's behind it and what he's really up to. But yeah, his argument is kind of that right-wing corporate libertarian point of view that you encounter on Fox News and Rush Limbaugh applied to resource management. That's his specialty. That's his wiggle. That's his little niche that he's carved out in the nonprofit industry. And he's made himself very rich by being the main guy who spouts off intelligent-sounding talking points about why environmentalism is misguided, right? And he uses these right. It's been right. All that trickle-down stuff, right? You guys are too young to know this, but this all started in the early '80s with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's the guy that came along and popularized this point of view, which has really just been the engine and the fig leaf of this massive transfer of wealth from the middle and lower classes, and from our labor, and from natural resources, from our forests and our rivers, this massive transfer of wealth from bottom to top. And if you look at the history of wealth inequality in our country, it's quite clear what's happened, right? From about 1980 on, there's just been this giant vacuum cleaner just sucking up all of our money, right? And all of our resources. And these are the kinds of arguments that are employed to pull the wool over your eyes and make it happen and make you think that you're free, right? When really you're just being ripped off left and right. Anyway, I get a little extreme sometimes. We're going to get back to philosophy in just 5 minutes, but we're going to take a 5-minute break, all right? Unless we have one more question, then we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Hey, we can take a break.
All right, come back right at 1 o'clock, and we will resume with William Baxter.
And so
It's like you got my syllabus.
I've got those four, and I read all the way through the syllabus, and it mentions the reading schedule, but I can't find the exact information where it would describe where the reading materials are at.
Well, there's a link on every. This is what you got. Huh? Most essays are just on the internet. Some essays are on PSU Library database stuff.
Oh my gosh.
But note that they're not hyperlinks. Some of them might actually be. Okay, well but many of them are not hyperlinks, so you just need to copy and paste them into your browser.
I literally, the mistake I must have made was scroll down and it must have just stopped perfectly on the page. I literally thought it was meant. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it goes on. It's a long syllabus. It's 11 pages.
So we have one reading assignment due today. And then
No. Our first reading assignment is due on Tuesday.
Oh, next week?
I mean, no, excuse me. We had 2 reading assignments today, but our first writing assignment is due on Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
A summary of all the recalls.
And then when we submit those, do we just print out hard copies of them?
Yeah. Or if you don't have a printer, I'll mention that. You can email it to me too if you don't have a printer.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think this guy's arguments are contrived to be designed for these transnational corporations? Or do you think he actually comes up with this on his own and then they go, oh, this guy, we like him?
It's a mutual.
I think it's a mutual
They
thing.
evolved, yeah. He realized that he was on something and he was encouraged. Yeah.
This is just almost too good. It's almost too good for certain individuals to benefit from it, for it to not be super contrived, is my thought. And he's a techno-salvationist kind of guy, where he thinks that technology will save the world.
I think so. That's probably a fair characterization. Yeah. But if you go, I suspect he's a Jesus salvationist above all.
Yeah, great.
Really? How terrible. Why? Yeah, you got that. Okay. Well, just send me an email and I'll send you what I have and send. You'll have a digital copy. All right, sure. Okay. So this syllabus is really more detailed, and that reminds me too. Make sure that I've sent out 2 different versions, right? Early on, I sent out one, and the file was just Environmental Ethics Winter 16 syllabus, right? And then I sent out the revised syllabus, and it said syllabus 2. So make sure that if you go around looking in your digital version, right? Then make sure that you're looking in the right version, which is the file that says syllabus 2, all right? But don't make the mistake of relying on the old syllabus, all right? And syllabus 2 is the same one that I handed out, the hard copy one. If you still need a hard copy of the syllabus, you get one after class, all right? And I'll wait a couple minutes for people to return, and then I'll get the attendance sheet going around. But for today's class, sometimes my description of my plans for that day's lecture are a little more detailed. I think I got a little more detailed than I ever did before on pretty much every description of what I planned for that day's lectures. But this class, you notice, is class session 2, Economic Reductionism and Natural Resource Ethics, wherein we attempt to defend the claim. All right, we're going to do our best now, alongside with our new buddy, right, Uncle Bill. William Baxter is going to help us defend the claim that economic benefit to human beings is the only objective and fair measure of morally right natural resource policy. All right, so this would be, to identify it squarely, this would be a utilitarian and more narrowly economic reductionist. Now, this is not necessarily, I don't think this is really what William Baxter is trying to defend. He's not trying to defend economic reductionism. But his argument lends itself very well. So don't go around telling other people that your Professor Mulier taught you that William Baxter is an economic reductionist, because that's not what I'm teaching you. But I'm using William Baxter's essay to point to this one very compelling tradition in environmental, in natural resource management, right? And that is the tradition of economic reductionism. It holds a lot of weight, carries a lot of weight, right? The idea that we ought to pursue those natural resource policies which produce the most economic benefit, right? That seems to make a lot of sense. So let's try to explore that point of view. So we'll try to learn about economic reductionism, but before I forget too, your first written assignment is due on Tuesday, okay? And that's the first reading summary. And I sent out an email where I tried to help all of you, if you still have questions about how to write a good reading summary, then send me another email. But read the one that I sent out yesterday in response to what's your name?
Brianna.
Brianna. Yes, in response to Brianna's very, very helpful email. All right. So the provocative essay. So we're going to try to make sense of William Baxter's essay, and we're going to try to defend the point of view that economic benefit to human beings is the only objective, right? And that would be a really clear and strong answer, and probably convincing to many people, to the normative question. What is the proper measure of morally right natural resource policy? Okay, here's an answer. A real good answer, right? The morally right, the proper measure of morally right natural resource policy is economic benefit. Okay? All right, and Ron Arnold would certainly agree with that, but he's real heavy, he's a heavyweight, heavy-duty guy, who introduces all this exotic natural law theory to go along with his essentially economic reductionist argument too. But William Baxter, he's not going to have any truck with that, William Baxter would just think this Ron Arnold guy is crazy, right? But he might make some points that I agree with, but he's using these pre-Enlightenment theories and talking about design and all that. And, Baxter's an Enlightenment thinker, he's going to reject all of that. But he's making this kind of the heart of his argument is his spheres of freedom argument, right? What he identifies as his spheres of freedom argument. And he tries to make the case for optimal pollution. My dad, who's a really big environmentalist, has been pretty much his whole life. He saw he read my syllabus and he came to that and thought, good God, the case for optimal pollution, that sounds awful, right, if you're an environmentalist. But William Baxter probably fancied himself as some kind of environmentalist. Now, give him the benefit of the doubt, I suspect, like a lot of middle-class intellectuals, he enjoyed outdoor recreation, probably went skiing and maybe backpacking and river rafting, stuff like that. So he might be an environmentalist. But he's making this strongly anthropocentric argument that resonates with many people's thinking. Every individual human should be free to do whatever she wishes, so long as her actions do not interfere with the legitimate, non-interfering actions of others. Okay? And so considerations about how an action affects a non-human animal or an ecosystem are ridiculous, according to Baxter, because those things don't have moral status, right? Humans do. And humans ought to be free to do what they want with natural resources so long as their actions don't interfere with the legitimate actions of others. So there are some implications that are good from this. Waste of natural resources is morally bad. And note that Baxter agrees completely with Pinchot on this point. Now that was one of Pinchot's biggest, he really was concerned about waste. He visited the lumber mills in the redwood country. And, or not the mills, but he visited the logging camps, and he saw that they were using dynamite to blow up these giant redwood trees that were thousands of years old, the world's largest living things, right? But they were so big that they couldn't get a saw all the way through the tree, right? There wasn't a saw big enough, so they would drill holes, and then they would blow up these giant redwood trees with dynamite. And the result was that the wood would just splinter into a million pieces.